Are you thinking about moving to Minnesota? You've probably heard a lot about all the great things that Minnesota has to offer, but what about the challenges? I'm Mary Schumann and I'm a realtor here in the Minneapolis area, and I make videos to help people who are trying to figure out if Minnesota is the right place for them. So if you're one of those people, watch more videos and feel free to download my free relocation guide that I've linked to down in the description box. All right, listen, I love it here, but I'll give you a dose of reality as well. Today, we're covering the flip side of the state and the disadvantages that you might find in living in Minnesota. I'm going to talk about everything from the weather to the taxes and the lifestyle quirks. So let's just get into it. So number one, obviously the big one, everybody talks about it, winter and all of its glories. So look, there is no way around this one. It's not a secret. It's probably the most well-known thing about Minnesota, besides hockey maybe. We typically have some pretty cold winters. Don't come here if you know for certain that you cannot stand to be cold absolutely ever, because you will be cold. At some point, it will happen. It's a fact of life. In January and February, we can get some pretty deep freezes. I'm talking about double digits below zero. And that can last for a couple of weeks. Your nose hairs are going to freeze. You may get some ice on your eyelashes if you're out there for a long time. If you're nervous about driving in snow, well, guess what? You're going to be nervous because we get snow. So facts are just facts. Make sure that your tires have a decent amount of tread on them. And I would also, if you have a choice, have an all-wheel drive car, or at least not a rear-wheel drive one, and you'll be just fine. Also, leave some space between cars and don't drive like a knucklehead. You know, it's simple. There are also benefits to some of this cold weather. I often talk about how much people here actually like winter. It's true. But you can watch other videos that I have made about that, including a video that I have called Winter Doesn't Suck. For the purposes of this video, though, I would just like to point out that deep freezes like this kill a lot of bugs. Also, if you're into snow sports or just into burying yourself under a pile of blankets with a good book in front of the fire, this is your place. I mean, you can't beat it. If you are new here, though, you are going to need gear, so don't mess around with this. It's not decorative here. We aren't fashionable. It's really about staying warm, and you want high-quality items that are wind and water resistant or waterproof. Wind and water in cold weather are not your friends, so pay attention to that. Covering extremities is going to be key. This means your digits, your head, and your toes. I would wear layers. The air pockets in fibers like wool and between your layers are what really keep you warm. So is this going to be an investment on your part? Yes, quality gear is not cheap, but buying it once and having it be awesome versus buying it and needing to replace it with something better is going to be the smarter way to go. May I also recommend wearing slippers in the house because it makes a huge difference for me personally. All right, another downside would be the heating bills associated with winter, which are probably higher here than in many places in the country because we do have to use our furnace for a longer period of time. And we also have to make up a bigger differential between the inside and outside temperature. We don't have the huge cooling bills in the summer though, so there is that flip side. Our AC units do last a lot longer here than they do in other parts of the country where you're kind of using that the same way we use our furnace. You're controlling temperature for a long period of time just in summer. Most homes here are fairly well insulated, and there have often been credits in place to help you improve the insulation if yours needs a bit of a boost. You'll also need to plan to have snow removal, either by yourself doing it or hiring somebody to do it. Shoveling is always an inexpensive option, but there will be times that you're going to question your sanity. We did buy a snow thrower. That's like the new word for snow blower. And I would get an old school gas one that has the power to stand up to the depth and the weight of the snowfall that we see here. Electric ones may be less expensive, and that's cute, but that's all I'll say about that. Alternatively, there are plenty of services that will come and do this for you if you want absolutely nothing to do with it at all anyway. If you live in the city, the likelihood is very high that you will have to clear your sidewalk or be fined by the city. So just know that leaving it there and ignoring it really isn't an option. All right, so another downside to winter is that it gets dark early, like around 4:30, and it stays that way till about 8 a.m. in the winter. So lots of darkness. If you have seasonal affective disorder, you may want one of those lamps, and you're probably going to need a vitamin D supplement and maybe a trip somewhere south in February when you just can't take it anymore. I would also invest in a humidifier for your bedroom and a high quality skin cream and stay hydrated. Oh my God. People don't realize that cold is often very dry. You must drink a lot of water here. I'll also add that despite the temptation to stay in the house, you're going to be a much happier person if you put all that nice new gear on and take a walk outside or just get outside somehow. Minnesotans do not hide away all winter inside the house, and you shouldn't either. All right, so one other note about gear while I'm thinking about it. I think slipping and falling is a very valid concern, but you can buy these like spiky things that fit over your shoes and keep you from slipping, and they're actually quite miraculous in their effectiveness, and I highly recommend them. Number 2 on the negatives is the cost of living and taxes. Whenever I post a video, I hear just a lot of howling from a certain segment of the population about how high the taxes are in Minnesota. And to this I say, you get what you pay for. Look at the rankings of states and their broken infrastructure, poor schools, minimal safety nets, percentage of the population and children that are in poverty, and then compare that to Minnesota. Personally, I like living somewhere that makes an investment in the public good. We're talking clean water, beautiful parks, well-stocked libraries, and all the things that make life a lot more pleasant and enjoyable. A lot of these things no individual can provide on their own, so it does take a village. I did an entire video comparing Minnesota to Texas on tax rates, and I'm going to link to that here. The funny thing about taxes is that they get their money one way or another. If it's not property tax, it's sales tax, and sales tax actually hits people with lower incomes much harder. They're paying a higher proportion of their income toward a tax. Minnesota does have a state income tax, and Minnesota does not tax necessities like prescription drugs, diapers, food, and clothing. I did find it interesting, and that's the Minnesota version of interesting, so that food costs here seemed a little bit higher than where we lived before. All right, so number 3, Minnesota nice culture. I mean, I've talked about this one a million times, but the concept of Minnesota nice is one that most people don't get. People are nice. It's so true. They are helpful. They are kind. But they're also very reserved and polite. You're not going to get an honest answer out of anyone if they don't like something. The most you're going to hear is that it's interesting. And that should really be your warning. If someone here says that it's interesting, it means they don't like it or they think it's odd. Most people here mind their own business. A lot of people say that it can be hard to make the kind of friends that you may be used to in other places. I wouldn't expect anybody to come dropping by your house or invite you over to their house unless they also aren't from here or are a member of your family. Also, many times people will not tell you directly exactly what they're thinking. So if you ask them if they're maybe going to do something, you're likely to get an answer somewhat along the lines of, yeah, I'll think about it. And what they really mean is they're not going to think about it. That's actually a no. You'll learn to read the tea leaves eventually. If you're an extrovert, and God bless you if you are, you're going to have to wear them down by putting yourself out there in front of the same people all the time to finally get them to actually trust you and see you as, a friend. So, Godspeed. I'm grateful to be an introvert because none of this has ever bothered me, even in the slightest. I actually thrived during the pandemic because introverts were actually built for that. All right. Number 4 is bugs and mosquitoes. I mean, people talk about this like crazy too. We do have mosquitoes. But everyone does. Don't give me any BS like you don't. When I was in Atlanta, I felt like I was getting eaten alive down there. I don't think it's a huge issue here, and I don't have a big issue with them in the city. When we have gone camping, they can be noticeable, but I think the bigger bug problem here is probably gnats. There are swarms of gnats in the summer. So if you're out on your bike, don't breathe through your mouth unless you're looking for a little bit of a protein boost. The other biggie is deer ticks. This one is not a joke. If you're out in an area that's woodsy or has tall grass, check all your crevices for ticks afterward, and then also check your dog. It's not a big problem in the city or suburbs, but if you're using the parks, I would check for ticks. Last little cohort of bugs that can be disturbing to people in the fall is the onslaught of ladybugs and box elder beetles. Neither one of these bugs bites, neither one is harmful. They tend to be everywhere in the late fall, and that seems to bug people. See what I did there? But you know what we don't have is venomous anything. I think your worst offenders here are going to be a bee sting, being bit by a mosquito, or a tick. Ticks are the most likely to give you long-term trouble in the form of Lyme disease. Another negative is public transportation. If you're coming from a bigger city like New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and you're used to using public trans, you may have an adjustment here. Most areas are reliant on cars, although if you live in the city of Minneapolis or St. Paul, you can use the light rail and buses, bike paths, Uber, or car share services, and definitely get by without one. If you live in the outer suburbs, there are actually commuter buses that will bring you into the city with very few stops via like an express lane. And these buses are clean. They're like the luxury coaches kind of thing. They're quiet. They're good options for people that prefer to let someone else do the driving so they can read a book, have their coffee, look out the window, not worry about traffic or parking. No matter what option you choose, you're going to need to be aware of the weather and potential for delays from that. Nobody's perfect. We do have some potential downsides here in Minnesota, like cold and long winters, higher taxes than some other states, and higher heating costs and preparing for winter. You may have to adjust to Minnesota nice and deal with some bugs in the summer and limited public transportation options. We also have a lot of wonderful that, in my opinion, makes up for the rest. Things like a high quality of life, great schools, strong communities, and really a beautiful state overall. Like the nature here is off the charts. Minnesota isn't perfect, and it's important to consider some challenges before moving, but for many, the benefits do outweigh the drawbacks. Check out my other videos and playlists for a look at various areas of the metro, like the suburbs and some other small towns. Also, some tips on dealing with winter in Minnesota. Let me know if you have questions, because I do love to talk to people that meet me on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.